you need to make new work for your portfolio. You've got the project picked out, you know what you want to do, you know where to start, but for some reason you just cannot be motivated to do it. That's what we're going to talk about today in the vlog, as well as depression, getting out of a crappy mood, and I'm going to show a few projects and a few different ways to approach the design process. It's a long one, so grab a drink, enjoy. Today is about to be a long ass day, and it's 8:13 and I'm already over it. This should be fun. The reality is it'll be fine, but I'm already tired. And yeah, we are on our way to our contract position. Gonna breeze through that. For some reason, you're only working half a day. It feels like there's a lot more critical stuff to get done. On the other hand, probably get just as much done in the half a days as I do on the normal days. And then I go to MCAD, teach the intro to graphic design class for 3 hours, and then I'll have a break, and then I will teach intro to typography for 3.5 hours. So kind of well, it's 8:15. We don't count the driving though, but it's like a 9 to 9:30 kind of day, so that's a good haul. Man, I'm low energy. This is not good. All right. The first part of that was low energy, kind of depressing. I apologize. I'm gonna leave it in though, because I want this thing to be fairly documentary. But now it's about 15 minutes later, and I'm in a vastly improved mood. And the reason that I'm in a much better mood is that I turned the camera off since I wasn't feeling it and had nothing to say. For some reason, every day for the last week, I've woke up with the same song by the Trans Megetti in my head, or kind of an indie rock post-hardcore band from like 1990 something. So I put that song on and then listen to 2 more Trans Megetti songs, roll the windows down, and feel like 1,000 times better. And let's bump the exposure up a little bit. Shit, fuck that up. And so now that we got this little burst of positive energy, a couple of thank yous. Thank you to Christian Duprez and Natalie for subscribing to this channel yesterday. I appreciate it. Leave a comment if there's anything that you have a question about that I may be able to help with, or just leave a comment to say hello. And then how about an extra special shout out to Carlos for the consistently thoughtful comments. There are other people that deserve a shout out too, but I don't want to crowd you in with these other ones. So thank you. Okay, one thing before we get into this. Here's a clip from episode 91. If you haven't seen episode 91, you should watch it. There's valuable information in it that gets into this whole, the problem with portfolio making type activities. The other problem is that we all want to get somewhere that we weren't expecting to get to. We want a little bit of mystery or surprise. So when we don't have that structure in that external project, we come up with an idea, and very often we come up with the idea of what to do and the solution at the same time. And then we don't work on it. Maybe we start it, but we don't finish it. Maybe we never start it, and that we procrastinate on it. And I think the reason that we procrastinate on it is there's no real excitement to it. Okay, so then why is it that you
procrastinate on those personal portfolio projects? Let's get into that now.
So you can imagine if you come up with an idea for a project, I'm going to do X, then you immediately come up with the solution of that. And when I do like independent projects with people, that's the problem quite a bit. This thing of like, oh, well, what I'm going to do is this, and how I'm going to design it is this. And when you do that, it is a recipe for procrastination, because it's the most boring thing in the world. You've answered every problem, and now it's a grocery list. The situation ends up being that in order to make it happen, you have to be extra motivated. You have to be extra motivated because the fact that you can see the end in sight so clearly makes you not want to do it. There's a, I think it's a Derek Sivers TED Talk. I really don't want to advocate for anybody watching any TED Talks, but we're going to do it. And he talks about this thing that, it's common knowledge that you're supposed to tell people about your goals, right? Like, okay, I want to do this, and then visualize it being done. And Derek Sivers talks about that. The research says that you got to not tell people about it and not visualize it, because when you do those things, your brain interprets what you're doing as a signal that you've finished it. And I think that when you've defined both project, content, design solution, your brain is just like, okay, cool, got that done. And then in order to actually get it done, you need this extra boost of motivation. That's when you have to start doing stuff like, okay, now not only are you visualizing it as being done, now you might have to do this thing where you now visualize how amazing your life will be once you do it. The thrill of design in the beginning is the sense of exploration. If someone hands you a project and then you respond to it, even if you immediately respond with your gut instinct, this is what I feel like doing, or it's for a gallery, so therefore I'm going to do this, at least there was some sense of exploration in that you got something new, a new input put into your life to explore. But if you steal that away from your process as well, then you there's nothing to explore, there's no interest, and you will procrastinate. In general, the average person is going to procrastinate on doing that. Here's what I advocate for relentlessly every day, blah, 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 which is put yourself in a position where there's as much exploration as possible. There is the exploration of the content, then there's the exploration of design, maybe there's the exploration of the format, but my general thesis would be the more you have to explore, the more fun it will be, the less likely you are to procrastinate. We say we fear the unknown, but it's not like we're thrilled about the predictable. We avoid it. The only time you're into the predictable is when it's been part of your daily life so often that it's fine, it's like oxygen. One of the easiest ways to start getting motivated to doing personal projects is to figure out, get the knowns so loosely defined that the project becomes kind of pure exploration. And how do you do that? You bring it down to the broadest thing. So instead of having this like really specific project, like, okay, I'm gonna design a Franz Klein exhibition catalog, and I'm gonna use 2 paper stocks. There's going to be these tracing papers with painted elements on top of this more kind of matte paper, and then the typography is going to be like this, and blah, 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 blah. Pull way back. Franz Klein catalog, cool. First step, research. Or define the format really loosely, just so that you have a known quantity that doesn't really impede on the design. And honestly, I think an easy way to do that is you just go through your bookshelf and you find a size of a book you like. You hold it and you go like, oh, cool, I like this. Boom. Now at least you got a page size. But you don't even need to worry about a page size because you still have to do your research. But keep it that loose and then just start at the beginning. That is presumably a much more motivating thing to work on. Because you start with the research, what do you have to do? Watch some documentaries, look at a bunch of paintings, read some books or whatever, go down a Google wormhole of Franz Klein quotes. So you do that. You just get that part done. One of the things that's cool about working in a way where you're motivated to work and you want to be working versus working in a way which you have to constantly motivate yourself to work is that whatever you're doing is going to benefit future you on some level. So open-ended reading a whole bunch about a subject, even if you decide not to do anything with it at that moment, like you lose track of time, on the whole, you've benefited yourself. You know, it's like a little micro liberal arts education. If you get further than that, for example, you start to get into conceptualizing the design or typographic studies or whatever, and again, you do it in this way where you're exploring versus chasing after the one idea, you're building up your skill set. Now, it's not to say that you don't improve by chasing after the idea, but not as much as you improve through, again, that super motivating open-ended play. So if you're procrastinating on some personal project that you've defined, just look back on it, and there's kind of two things. First, have I defined this so much that it's a grocery list and I don't want to do it? Second, am I telling myself I want to do this because I think it's the kind of thing I'm supposed to be doing, or is it actually something I want to be doing? If it's not, kill it. So my voice is destroyed right now from teaching, which is essentially a kind of coaching. But it's sort of funny because my students kind of poop out by 3:30, which is like a half hour before class ends. In a class that's only 3 hours, I just put in another hour and a half on the same project on something I don't even need to be doing. I fully recognize that I am probably the last person in the world that should be trying to do a daily vlog. Like, you know, I'm doing enough. I got more than enough on my plate. It's obviously not the best idea. The thing is that I recognize that you have to put something out into the world, something that reminds everyone that you're alive. And working a freelance contract gig, you're not making any output that's shareable, which is like ultimately a big part of what the motivation comes down to. So it's either like make stuff for Instagram, which I don't know how much value there is in that. I think a big part of it is that doing stuff like this, that even if we're at the point where most of these videos are only seen by 10 people, the thing I really like about it is the fact that it might be really meaningful to one of those people. As opposed to no matter how much I do on Twitter or Instagram, no matter how cool the stuff is, it's not going to be nearly as meaningful. So hence we're doing this every day. But then I have kind of lost my mind and keep trying to make it better. But what can I say? I'm excited about it. She was doing something. I was like, what the hell is she doing? Like, I've never seen this before. And she was adjusting the exposure, which was like so irritating to me that I had never figured that out in like 10 years of using iPhones. So whatever. This is a project that I essentially assigned to my students in this intro to graphic design class. And then I appear to be doing more work on it than they are, because they're teenagers and they get bored easily and would rather draw, which is odd. The basic gist of it is it's a tour poster for the anniversary of an event called Meeting at Offsite, which was a Japanese improvisers event in the early thousands. It was characterized by this extremely quiet non-music, basically. And very unconventional instruments. Like one of the founders played a no-input mixing board. So he'd take a mixing board and run a chord out of it and back into it.
So it was recording itself. And one of the other people, this woman, Sachiko M., she would sample the sound of the sampler she was using. So she'd run a chord out and just capture the slight buzz and sample that, amplify it, sample it again. And essentially it's really quiet, irritating sounds. It's very odd, but it's also fascinating. Our first step, the very first day, was just to do research, read about it, listen to the music, jot down any ideas about it. We started off with type-only layouts. This was an example of one. Just figuring out the form of the type and what it might want to do and like what typefaces kind of work. And in general, not being super concerned with concept. And one of the things that we actually talk about on our studio website is the idea that this is a way that we work under certain conditions. So this was like another version done in class on Tuesday. That was another one. If I wasn't running around talking to the students the whole time, I feel like I would have got a lot more done. And then the other thing was to do these studies of just the name of the exhibition. So strip away all the complication of trying to figure out how to organize the concerts. What just happens if you only deal with the tour name? So this one's mildly conceptual in that it's got a slightly bent line to kind of like echo these like lines of, these like fragile lines of feedback that you'd hear in the music. This one was about sort of like sounds kind of bubbling up from the surface. This was another one. I kind of like that one. So these are mildly conceptual, right? Like off-site in America. The goal being to exhaust possibilities and hopefully just see the thing in a different way. So a lot of this stuff like I don't actually like, but I kind of felt like it worked. This was interesting that 3 main people like that were behind it, the eyes lined up and they looked like people, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And that was like the first one that was pulled from the original poster. I said that the other 3 were done in 2 hours, but that's wrong. All of what's here was done in about 2 hours. We do that, and then we file that away and don't deal with it. Then the next thing that we did was the following day, gather images. So what we did was like just went and found images using search terms from the research we had done the first day. I don't remember, I think I searched for birds because I was thinking, because a bird showed up and it reminded me of like the chirpy sounds of this music. So I was like, let's search for birds. And there was like this lone bird, which to me sounded like this little sound in the middle of nothing. Fragility was a thing. So like this snowflake photo showed up and I was like, oh, that might be interesting. I don't remember what this was. It just showed up and I was like, okay, the texture's neat. Some kind of building. The whole thing is about intense listening. So this kid seemed neat. I probably searched quiet or silence and got this. Same with this. That's a processed version of this. This might have shown up in silence as well. This just showed up and I was thinking about like fragility and like everyday sounds as art. So like this feels like it has a sound. Searching for samplers and mixing boards. I don't remember if I searched for a dude in a boat, but he showed up. That's a version of it that was slightly processed afterwards. At offsite, everyone sat on stools to listen to the music. And then I started purposely looking for sounds that were really, for pictures of things that were loud. Because the place was known for having these paper thin walls. So the city around them became part of the sound as well. So I literally just started searching for everything I could think of in a city that was obnoxiously loud. That's another like processed version trying to make a garbage truck uglier than it already is. Offsite was at the end of an alley near a skyscraper, so I searched for alleys. Happened to find an alley in Japan, which was helpful. Not the alley, but whatever. I think I searched for chords, ambulances, and then more white stuff. So that was kind of the like process on this. You don't have time to come up with an idea when you only have 15 hours from start to finish distributed over 5 days. That's really difficult. So what's another way to get towards an endpoint that's predictable? Because that's a really important thing. It's like, it's not useful to have an experimental process if you don't know if you're gonna succeed at the end of the week. Oh, and then this frog reminded me of a sound coming out of like a line. I think I searched lines and the frog showed up and I was like, oh, the frog is dope. So that was phase 2 of the project. The next thing we did was we went into InDesign. Using the stuff we found, could we make posters with no content just to see what the images want to do and what kind of stories they might tell? So like this one has lots of green on the bottom, but if you just crop it to that little bit of green, it starts to be like this this sound you have to like try and hear, or that was my thinking. With the ambulances and the nature photos, I started to think about the idea of quiet versus loud. This one just cropping in on that thing for like the most kind of violent part of it, which is a big old dump truck with some silence in it. Just a compilation of loud stuff. And then in this one, loud to quiet. So I made this frog composition, just like repeating that frog image. And so I'm basically just looking at like, what do these photos want to do? Like the nature and the birds versus the California garbage can or wherever that is, Arizona or somewhere like that. The frog who's upside down and now lives with the dumpster that has been distorted. We did that for a while. Then we processed out all these photos in ways that amplified the meaning. And then today, we started putting the typographic research and the photos together. I actually didn't use anything from the typography day because most of this stuff, I was so sort of excited about that photo layer of it that I just started putting type over that and seeing what it could do there. For whatever reason in my mind, this frog with the lines just repeating and then the substructures just felt really right. I don't know why. So then it was just about organizing that type. This was actually the very first one. So like I had this thing that I liked already, the fragile snowflake against the loud, dirty ambulance. And I didn't even really mean to do it. I just copied the type in and scaled it so it fit in there. I was like, oh, that might be a thing. My threshold for what is good is extraordinarily low. That's why there's a million versions. Because the minute I go like, oh, it's kind of cool, then I just move on. I don't bother like fixing it too much because I get mad at myself if I spend more than like 15 minutes on anything. And then starting to explore like meaning. So offsite in America, kind of making it like that the top is offsite and that the bottom is about them coming to America. Just an alt on that. So this one was like the idea of, can I just organize this thing as a block and then figure out how to pull out enough hierarchy to where it works, but is also this sort of dense, noisy, but kind of quiet block. Trying again, like to play with the idea of meaning. So like offsite, but in America, and it's loud and dirty. And then everything kind of fitting up in this upper quadrant. Another version of that, an alt on that previous one using Maple, which is like my favorite typeface in the world these days. This is like another version of that. So trying to simplify the concept somewhat. Another version of that same idea. I think this was the last thing I worked on. So that's where this left off at 5:45 this afternoon. I don't think I've talked about it in this class, but I have this general idea that when you're doing a creative project or any project, it should get easier as it goes forward. I think if the project gets harder as it goes forward, it means that some due diligence was skipped at the beginning and that now you're making up for it by struggling through something. Well, the work I did today was much easier than the work I had to do yesterday, which was probably about the same as this stuff. But the thing that's nice is that if that first day goes well and I get results, then that means every other day, no matter what happens, I can always jump back to this folder and be like, there's stuff here to work with. But then when I got to making the image only studies, and I was like, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. That then it's like when I come in today, I'm like, all right, I can't wait to do this. So each day gets like progressively easier. Just a quick pause here. You're gonna see about a minute of the actual design process for this offsite poster. I took a time lapse of about the 2 hours I spent on it and then chopped out just some of the significant moments of that. And this just kind of shows the way that I kind of throw type around when I'm in a certain mode or in a certain way of working. I try to work really fast. I try to have good enough be the measure of success before I move on to the next thing. And so that's what you're going to see for the next minute. So this is a poster plus exhibition graphics for the Soap Factory for an exhibition that was called Resonating Bodies. The general deal with the show, it was a guest curator. She had curated a group of sculpture and installation and kind of performance artists. Like she had a previous relationship with all of them, whether it was collaborating with them or showing their work at her gallery. So it was kind of like, it was almost like bringing a tour into town. And she was specifically interested in the idea that since she knew them, she knew how they ticked, so then she could inject tension into the process by putting like certain people near each other. It's like she wanted like the pieces to interact with each other, not to just be a discrete sculpture in a space. So this was the actual client deck. So the research process was that's the press release for the exhibition. So read that. I didn't meet the curator beforehand, but the Soap Factory put out a podcast that had an interview with her about the show. So I had some contacts through that. So I listened to that, and then I just go to every single artist website, and in as short a period of time as possible, try to wrap my head around what they're doing so that I have a perspective on what they're about. And then the other thing is I just jot down notes endlessly. This was a quote from the press release. Generator of platforms and sites for action. And then the other quote that stood out was the idea of get in the way, which was about this idea of specifically chopping up the space so that the works would conflict with each other. So these show some of the notes, like bizarre little sketches that I would make of like somewhere impossible connections came up. So I made a sketch of an impossible connection. A site for action reminded me of tour posters where like you go to First Ave and there's the poster with the empty space and they write down like May 31st. So I thought like, oh, that's like a site for action. Just a bunch of different notes. So this is a list of the final words. This thing is a really rough version of a thing called Bedno diagram. So the idea with the Bedno diagram is that, this one was the first one I had done, it's kind of wrong, but it works anyway, is you have your two axes and then, or axes or whatever you say, and you put in all of these themes or words or materials that you plan to explore. And then what it does is it forces you to see combinations that you wouldn't see just by thinking hard. Each of these indicates that like I sketched out that marriage of ideas until it worked. So you could do it as a way to figure out what doesn't work, but I was using it as a way to figure out, like to force myself to be like, I have to find a way to make relationships and sites for action work. Like I have to make a sketch. And I do this in a terrible way that's a lot more heady. The more smart way to do this is to just come up with two themes. So if it's like a bank, symbols about money and symbols about eagles, or not like whatever the implicated body or whatever ridiculousness I came up with. And then so these are the sketches. Each sketch explains the concept and then shows visual reference that kind of like hopefully makes the idea real. The typography is pretty obviously very rough at this point. It's not even straight. As we get more into it, the references get better. So this one, the idea was that there would be two levels of information. Those red boxes would be one level, and you'd have to get right up close to it to read it. And then there'd be this gigantic, more like brutalist level in the background. And so this stuff kind of shows not what it will look like, but the neighborhood of what I was thinking about. This is roughly the same idea, except that like leftover space between the typography. And this kind of helps to say like how we're seeing it, like very modernist, clean, tough. And then this one was about the relationships with the artists. And the idea was that each of these little shapes would be a custom infographic that mapped the relationship between the different artists so that you could figure out who the curator was, where these artists had collaborated, and that kind of stuff. You can see like design references were very much about Helvetica and kind of modernist stuff. And after the head of the Soap Factory saw this, he sent a photograph of a book, and I was like, oh, we're on the same page. That was like high 60s modernism. So the curator picked this concept, which is funny because it's the worst sketch of them all. It was done at like 3 in the morning and then I collapsed. And then what we ended up doing was that. So that's the final poster, which is funny because it kind of looks exactly like that god-awful sketch, but is obviously clearly better. Once it was approved, then we really dove into, one, making that symbol language work. So there's actually like, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever made, because it's a poster that has a key that you really can figure out everyone's relationship to each other if you're patient. I always have to reacquaint myself with it, but it basically works like this. The triangle indicates Three Walls Gallery, which is Shannon Stratton, the curator's gallery. The circle indicates this exhibition called Gestures of Resistance that she was involved with, Sarah Black was involved with. And then the squares indicate this art farm in Harold, Ohio, that you can see that everyone has been to or worked at, with the exception of Judith Lehman. Then you have the nature of the relationship. Slashes mean they exhibited. So Kelly Kaczynski exhibited at Three Walls. Dots mean a residency. So she did a residency at the Harold Farm. And then circles means they curated it. So Judith Lehman curated Gestures of Resistance, and Shannon Stratton must have co-curated Gestures of... No, she curated all three. That's why she's got circles all the way across. And then the color shows where it's a collaboration. So that dark purple, Sarah Black and Julian Soto, they collaborated on the farm. And then Conrad Freeberg and Julian Soto also collaborated on the farm. As a general design thing, I really like the idea of making something that both serves its purpose, which is that it's an ad and it looks nice, but I really like it if it has a bizarro second life that makes sense in some way, which this does. So we did a project like this for the soap factory, and then 2 months before we had done another one where we used click tracking software that mapped everywhere my mouse had been during the time I worked on the poster. So every time I worked on it, we'd turn the software on and it would track the design of this thing. And it looked more like a graph of when they showed drone strikes across the world. And then it would have these big circles because I was on the phone and the mouse just sat there. I mean, it was easy to do, it was a very technical idea. And then we did this, which was another kind of data visualization on some point. So this is 2012. So at this point, I've been working for 9 years. I'd never had an idea like this in my entire life, period, like end of story. That Bedno diagramming was instrumental to this idea. It would never have popped into my head organically, and there's no way I would had ever thought really hard and got there. And the same with the one before it. So I think that Bedno diagram is like one of the just greatest creative tools ever. One thing I will say about clients and stuff is that this project was I never met with the curator. She didn't realize we were in a different time zone and she missed the meeting. And I kind of freaked out because like they have the world's worst sketches in them. So I'm thinking like this woman's gonna think I'm insane. And instead, she called 10 minutes after the meeting ended and was like, oh, can we do the thing with the graphs or whatever? Just like, done. And then she emailed me a drawing of the relationships between the artists. And then like we figured it out from there. One of the things that I think is that if you introduce the work to people in a very unfinished state and they get to be the one that finishes it, like not only do you get to finish it, but you get to pick which thing comes to life and then you get to finish it. I think that people get invested in a way where all the tweaking they do at the end, they don't need to do anymore. Because the reason people tweak stuff endlessly is because they want to put their 2 cents in and they want to be invested. But if you can invest them early in a significant way, then like I don't know, can I see a couple more Pantones? Like that stuff goes away. Because like that stuff is just people trying to make something they don't like into something they do like, just to like, I don't know, feel good that day. But if you show people stuff really early, they tend to leave you alone at the end. That's been my perspective over like the last 5 years. So one more project. This is a CD design for my mother, actually, who is like a sound healer. So she makes basically drone music to meditate to. The process for this was to listen to the sounds, talk to her, and come up with free associations based on those conversations to make mood boards from. So this was like the first deck. This was done over the course of like maybe 3 weeks, the whole project. So this was a mood board of fonts that kind of were color, that was inspired by the idea of being immersed in sound. Drawn paintings, so idea of a very human feeling painting that shows a lot of process and mark making. They feel more like colored pencil than paint. Hand-drawn abstractions. Somehow we were talking about Saul LeWitt, and my mom had gone to a Saul LeWitt show and she just sent me a ton of photos of it. And there were these hand-drawn ones that then led to this mood board of like abstract images that were clearly drawings and were repetitive. Then there was this idea of immersion, and there were 2 takes on it, color and like white and messy, like a Bryce Marden painting, which was about the idea of sound as an enclosure that is transparent but thick enough to create a bubble around you. I always make it sound like I don't take anything seriously, but clearly I do. And then library music, which is like these essentially stock music from like the 60s and 70s, but it had this like kind of specific aesthetic. And the idea was that it was a tool, like it's a tool for TV studios and movie studios in the 70s. And my mother's music isn't really music. Like she thinks it's weird that I sat down and listened to it while I was doing something, because she thinks it's like for this meditative massage practice or whatever. Radiating forms was another one, because the idea of the sound was radiating. Overlays, so color laying across images as a metaphor for sound enveloping the listener. So I sent that to her to see what she really liked and what stuff she didn't care for. So she did say to think about the nature of it, of what she does, which is ambient, fluid, entraining, resonance, anchor, expansive, and spaciousness. So she liked this, but wanted to lean towards muted colors and wants softness, like things emerging from baths or swaths of color rather than defining them. Repetitive gestures, I like a lot, but would want motifs flowing from one pattern to the next the way the sound journey does. Love both of these. Feel like mystery and expansiveness. And then like the sound effects cover and the Japanese electronic music cover. So I just went into this page and then just took out everything that didn't belong with these couple of images. Same thing with the radiating forms one, took out everything that didn't belong. I kept some stuff in that I was gonna like work with no matter what her opinion was, in case I needed to. The color overlays, this got simplified down to kind of less pieces. The way that this process works is work with whoever I'm working with to create all these mood boards of free associative things. Then each mood board becomes a bucket to work within. If there's a radiating forms mood board, that means I'm gonna make a bunch of radiating forms, and then I'm gonna make a bunch of hand-drawn abstractions, and I'm gonna make a bunch of this, that, and the other thing. And I'm not gonna design a cover, I'm just gonna make stacks of stuff. And then I'm gonna start assembling that into pieces and just see what stuff works and what stuff doesn't work. So this is 17 pages of like psychedelic 70s record cover patterns. These are using photos that she sent, because I also just asked her for any photos that she had that felt relevant. I'd never made any of these trippy things before. They're the best. So that was like a bucket. I think this is the very first day of stuff. So just exploring type coming out of gradients. This was probably like an hour and a half worth of work, maybe. I really like that. And then because the gradients were working, then I felt I got greedy and wanted to start making stuff with type already. So I spent the weekend making drawings too. These drawings are my interpretations of the sound journey. One of the process bits that's missing from this talk was working with those hand-drawn abstractions. I'm really bad with color, so what I did was I went back into the decks and I pulled out color palettes from some of the references that made it all the way through. And so I literally had an Illustrator document, as you're looking at right now, that was a color palette, and then I would sample out those colors and then kind of show them in the distribution that they were used in that original source material. Then I had a separate Illustrator file with that artwork placed in as bitmaps and kind of cut up into its different zones, and then I would explore those different color palettes. That's how this stuff got used to actually make something. And then this was the stuff I sent her. So that's the hand-drawn abstraction. Here's another version of it. Between all of that, at first she liked that, then was really into this thing. From there, this is the actual cover. The crazy radiating forms, which she wasn't feeling, but in Photoshop, I used a tilt shift to soften the edges, and then she was sold on it. And then I convinced her that you cannot put type on the cover because it will ruin it. So we put all the type in the inside, and then took that photo of her that's like, it's behind the CD in here. That's the process of that. Just for perspective, because I think this kind of stuff is helpful. So the first deck was 312, and the last deck was 329. So is that 17 days or something like that? The entire project took 24 hours, like when you chop it all up. And I think that's one of the things about having a creative process that you have clearly defined and that you know works for the time frame that you need, is that you can get a lot more done if you have this really clear plan of how to work and like how you're gonna approach it. So it was mostly just making sure that we didn't do multiple versions, that we just like kind of agreed like wherever this is at, it's only getting marginally better than this. So it either works or it doesn't. I don't want to do like the thing where you're tweaking out 10 different things because it's not gonna get better. Like it's either good or it's not. That's how I try to be very black and white about it. So then like you're only tweaking the one to make it as good as it can be. But you don't sit there and be like, let's pick 5 things. Because like those 5 things are getting 10, 20% better. The final cover is better than this, but it's like basically the same. And so it's not like it's gonna get unbelievably beautiful. You know, like you gotta pick something. Helping someone figure out which of the 2 or 3 works is kind of fine, because she didn't do the thing of trying to make these into something she liked, and that's the thing that sucks, is when they're like, okay, well, I like this, but, you know, can we get rid of the gradient? Can we not make it purple? And that big type is too big. And then you'd be like, okay, cool. So it's a square? And then, you know, like that's how people like, when they don't want to tell you they hate stuff and they're like too non-confrontational, that's when they start doing the thing where they're like, I like this, but, and then they change every single thing about it. I think when you show someone 20 versions, they're much more apt to be like, ooh, I don't like that. And then they're like more apt to be honest overall, because it can't hurt my feelings if I like have done that volume of work. So in our studio, like on our process page, like we legitimately talk about the idea that there's 3 different processes that are designed for different timeframes and different budgets. This volume of work was done in 24 hours, like over the course of 3 weeks to a month. So that makes it a thing that's massively cheaper just due to hours. What it costs per hour is exactly the same, but it takes a lot less hours to do this than to come up with a smart idea like the resonating bodies poster. If somebody doesn't have a budget and they don't have time, then we do like the more typography based thing, because we know that that will get results. But the idea is to make sure that the process is always mapped to the length of the engagement and then the number of hours we can afford during that time. So if you get a lot of time but no money, this is like the process that we go with. And then that reduces the stress of coming up with ideas, because that's really the stressful thing about being a designer is you have a super short deadline and there's always a very realistic threat of not having an idea at all. Like it's always looming. If you have a month deadline, that's not an issue in any way, shape, or form, because you can spend a solid week doing research. But when somebody gives you a project on Monday and want results on Friday, I am not convinced I can come up with a good idea. So instead, I can go down a different avenue where I can come up with a good solution. I just don't have to come up with a smart, intelligent idea. All right, should we kick off a project? So you're gonna design a publication of your own photography. We're gonna explore the interplay of type and image. We're gonna work with sequential typography, like type that unfolds over pages. And we're gonna work with the idea of rhythm. So when you have a multi-page document, there's this idea of rhythm. And like, if you make every page the same, it has a rhythm, a monotonous rhythm, and it doesn't have any drama or anything. So we're gonna explore that idea. The content, pull the last 20 photographs you shot. If you're not comfortable showing something, move to the next one. If some of those shots are outtakes or alternates, you can use your discretion as to whether to include them or move on to the next image. If you're like me and to get one photo, you take 8 photos, you could be like, nah, I'm gonna show all 8 of those nearly identical photos. That's fine. Or you can be like, no, I'll just pick the best one and then I'm going down the line to the next one. It's totally at your discretion. And then write some kind of caption for each photo. Then you're gonna design sample spreads. So here's how I'm gonna suggest that you do this. Start to play with the basic design elements, which is like you have photographs, you have page numbers, and you have captions. Other things that you could potentially design include divider pages or other custom elements. So what you would have for next week is 6 pages for each, or 4 to 6 pages for each design direction. What we wanna see is enough design to understand how that story plays out. So one spread is not really a sample spread, because all we can assume then is, oh, every other page in this thing will look identical to this. And then if you're like, no, that's not the plan. We need to see enough sample spreads to understand what is the plan. Like, are some photos full bleed and don't have a caption on them? Does one of the concepts actually involve putting all the captions at the end? In which case we need to see that page and then a couple spreads that show us how the photos play out. You want to do enough to get your idea across. So you don't have to worry about the cover. If you do have like an idea like, oh, this needs a divider page, maybe the divider page is the dates the photos were taken on. Like maybe the photos are split between 2 days. And so you have a spread or a single page that's got that date and then all those pages follow. Design that page then as well and show us that, because that's like an integral part of the story. If you're struggling with the design, like you feel like you're spinning your wheels, take a step back and focus on sequencing the images overall. Print all those photos out, small, black and white, and then just sequence them on a table to get a feel for like, oh, okay, that's the sequence. Now I can design, because I'll pick the middle chunk or I'll pick the first 2 to 3 spreads or whatever. So next class we'll pick a direction, and then the following week we'll have the whole thing done. You'll flesh out the full design of whatever that chosen direction is. So it is Friday. We made posters with teenagers and they turned out pretty incredible for something that only could get 15 hours of labor.